Good afternoon, everyone, to this second deep dive session and actually final session of day one of the Safer Internet Forum 2021. While we have still loads of colleagues joining us, I apologize. We have given you just a very short amount of time to grab a fresh coffee and to have a comfort break. But we are super delighted to continue. It has been quite a productive day already, and definitely this final session where we will look into new and emerging technologies is definitely the right topic to end the first day of the Safer Internet Forum, which has been very productive. During today's session, and we have a bit more than an hour, we will consider some of the new and emerging technologies, such as augmented and extended reality. And this deep dive will also build on the plenary discussions from this morning, where we also looked already into the Internet of 2030. So we will look closely at many developments, but also, of course, discuss opportunities and risks. So we have a full hour ahead of us. And as in the deep dive session before, we encourage everyone, please do make use of the chat throughout the session. Your microphones and your cameras are disabled for the moment, but if you raise your hand, we can bring you in at any moment during the session, because we have Dr. Victoria Baines with us, who is a visiting fellow at Birmingham University in the UK, where she does research on online safety policy, the future of cybercrime, and security rhetoric. She has a background in law enforcement, and also previously she was a visiting fellow at Oxford University. She has been collaborating with very established organizations such as Interpol, ECPAT, and UNICEF as well. She's also on the advisory board of InHope and a trustee of the Lucy Faithfull Foundation. The list is very long. Hi, Vic. It's so good to have you with us. We're so excited to hear what you have in stock for us. And please, the floor is yours to kick us off for this deep dive session.
Thank you very much, Sabrina, and welcome everybody. I'm absolutely thrilled to be discussing with you this afternoon, and I do mean discussing, because what I'm really looking forward to, as you know, it's only me speaking in this session this afternoon, and I'm really looking forward to your input. So Sabrina and I have discussed how we're going to run this session, and what I would really like is for you to intervene with your questions and comments whenever you want, because as you will see, we're going to go through a number of different technologies, all of which will provide us with food for thought. But when we piece them all together, we'll present a possible world of 2030 to us, in which all of these technologies interact. And a lot of what we see will be familiar, because we already see the signals of this technology in development now, but much of what we see will raise some new questions for us. So I'm going to share my screen to start. And Sabrina and Carl, if you could give me the thumbs up that you can see that, that would be super helpful.
Yes, absolutely.
Fabulous, that's good. We've just been talking about privacy, and it took me a while to work out that Apple's updates to its privacy settings meant that I was struggling to share my screen when we were testing this. So that just shows how, you know, privacy and safety and functionality all interact in ways that we don't always expect. Okay, so I'm quite lucky, and as Sabrina's intro may have shown you, I'm also quite greedy about the things that I work on. I work on lots of different things that interest me. But one of the areas that I'm most fortunate to work on is looking at future scenarios. So looking at the future development of technology, the opportunities that that may afford, particularly to children and young people, but also some of the challenges that that might raise for us. And I know that you've been promised that in all of these deep dive sessions, there would be solutions proposed. Well, to a certain extent, I'm going to disappoint you this afternoon, because I will definitely be able to highlight some opportunities. I will certainly be able to highlight some challenges, but I'm afraid I'm going to leave you with more questions then I'm going to leave you with answers. And what I'm hoping is that this will be food for thought for us to consider and discuss further in the future how we're going to make the most of some of these opportunities and how we're going to address some of these challenges. Now, I mentioned that I get to work on the future and emerging technologies quite a lot. And I first started doing this when I worked at Europol, where I was responsible for threat analysis at EC3, the European Cybercrime Centre. And back in 2012, we did a futures exercise called Project 2020, looking, as the name suggests, at technological development by 2020, or plausible, let's say, rather than predictable technological development by 2020, and the concerns that we might have, particularly for cybersecurity, but also criminal misuse. And there are companies that make a business out of trying to predict when some of these technologies will come online. We reran that exercise. Now I've been doing that independently with Trend Micro, the cybersecurity company, and we reran it this year for 2030. So looking another 9 or 10 years hence. And I'll talk about that project a little bit later. But one of the baselines that we use for that technological development is we use this thing called the Gartner hype cycle. Now, we can't predict the future absolutely. Nobody can. It's filled with uncertainty. And there are technologies that we know are being developed, but what we can't always tell is exactly which year they're going to be ready and exactly which year they become mainstream. So when we're talking about 2030, please give me a bit of leeway here and treat that timeline flexibly. Some of these technologies will definitely be mainstream usage by 2030, and some of them might take a little bit longer to be used, or to be used by everybody and all young people. So I'm going to hone in on 3 particular emerging technologies that I think are of particular interest for children and children's rights, also for opportunities for them, and also for some of the safety challenges. The first one is going to be artificial intelligence, and I'm sure you will have already heard far too much about AI in your everyday work. But AI is going to be plugged into pretty much everything, and not just stuff that we do online, but stuff that we do offline. So we're thinking in particular about smart cities technologies, about the Internet of Things, about crazy things like our street lights getting smarter, about our energy providers getting smarter. So AI with everything is going to be turbocharging most of what we do online and offline. But also I'm going to speak about the next generation of what we call persuasive computing. So, using machines to affect changes in our perceptions, but also behavioral change. So managing problems, but also pushing towards particular outcomes and particular behaviors. And then I'm also going to talk about immersive environments. So something that's now being called XR, extended reality, but you may also know as virtual reality, the headsets, or augmented reality being overlaid over what you see in the real world. Okay. Now, I'm conscious that we've already had quite enough to think about, firstly in our day jobs, but also what we've heard today. There are enough safety issues for us to be exercised with, but I just want to give you a flavour of some of the things that I think about in terms of the considerations for safety, for what we already have in development. And so I would like to ask you a question, and please feel free to answer in the chat. But my question is, what links these three people? Any thoughts? What do we think? Ah, excellent. Right, you're ahead of me. This is good. I can see the chat popping up there. Yes, you're absolutely right. These people don't actually exist outside of data. They've been generated by AI. They've been generated by generative adversarial networks. You'll hear that acronym more and more, GANs, in the next few years. So although we have got a dedicated session on CSAM tomorrow morning, and I've promised Carl and Sabrina that I won't talk about CSAM, it does raise some very interesting considerations. Because if we have images of children that don't exist, what do they constitute legally? What do they constitute ethically? It's gosh, must be 10 years, I think, if not more, perhaps even 12 or 13 years since I used to work reports coming into CEOP, the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Centre in the UK, where young people would report into us that they had been made naked by somebody online. And what they meant by that was that they had been photoshopped into naked images. And that led to a number of countries changing their legislation so that, non-photographic depictions or fake depictions of child abuse were also criminalized. And generally speaking, what some countries' legislations have done is to say that as long as it's linked to a real child, even if it's a computer generated image of a child or a faked image of a child, then the same principles of victimization of that child apply as they would do to a record of a crime scene, a record of sexual exploitation of a child. But what about children who have never existed? This young lady on the right has never existed. She doesn't exist outside of data. And so really now is the time for us to be thinking, and certainly for those countries who haven't criminalized, I was going to say non-photographic images. This is a photographic image, but who haven't criminalized computer generated imagery. It's time for them to be thinking about whether these are child sexual abuse images or not, if they have sexual activity depicted in them. And as I said, this is going to be a number of cases where I don't have an answer for you, but clearly we can see that there might be a market for use of child sexual abuse material that involves children who don't actually exist outside of data. And we can also see other uses, of course, from a broader internet safety perspective. We could see more faked images, and some of those concerns that you've raised in the chats about deep fakes, being used to bully children and young people. How do we see those, and how are we going to counteract them? Now, there are some measures that are being used to identify videos and material that has been manipulated. But if we can use things like generative adversarial networks to create something from scratch that never existed, that's a different kind of challenge. Okay, so that's the first example of AI. But if we broaden out, Sabrina's popped up, and that means we may have questions or comments. Thank you, Sabrina.
If I can just interrupt you for 1 second, we have a question in the chat from Barbara from the Austrian Safer Internet Center, and she is asking, if you have sexual abuse material with fake faces, can the body and misuse be fake too already today?
Yeah, so hello, Barbara. It's lovely to catch up with you, not in person, unfortunately, but to see you through the ether. Well, I think you can fake both aspects of it. What we've tended to see with deepfakes is almost what a more sophisticated version of what I've described, right? Which is just sticking somebody's head on an already naked body. But I think what we will see potentially with some of these generative adversarial networks is that you could create naked footage from scratch, and that's the bit that I think, you know, as these particular tools become smarter, that's where it won't look so much like a copy and paste as we've seen with some of the celebrity deepfakes at the moment.
Thank you, Vic. One more question, if I may, also from a colleague from the Safer Internet Center working for the Awareness Center. She's asking, do you think that the term AI represents the new technologies that are quickly emerging? In her experience, the term is quite loose. She gives a couple of examples. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I absolutely agree. I think AI is, it's interesting, isn't it, that I used in my first slide what's called a hype cycle. There is so much hype about AI, and some of which will be, you know, hyped up even more or questioned a little bit in this particular slide. But yes, it's certainly the case that quite often artificial intelligence is confused with machine learning, and they're not exactly the same thing. We already have machine learning, you know, we have machines that learn, and we already have quite a lot of automation. You know, as we know, a lot of the big tech companies, particularly social media, rely on automation to respond to some of the safety issues that we have on them. So sometimes automation is being presented as AI, when actually, you know, what we're looking at for the future of AI is, you know, algorithms and tools and machines that can really, really learn. And that to a certain extent will have autonomy and won't necessarily, they don't need as much human supervision as they do at the moment. But that raises a whole other ethical and legal debate about how much supervision they will require, particularly when we look at things like autonomous vehicles. But with the concept of AI with everything applied to internet safety, there are, of course, challenges and opportunities. So we can see the potential for greater automation of those safety issues. And we see that already in the cybercrime world, you know, spam being automated, sent, you know, distributed in an automated fashion. But we've also seen for a very long time, actually, people engaged in grooming of children, you know, sending large numbers of messages in the hope of getting at least somebody to respond back. So it really is just a kind of turbocharging of that. And everything I'll be talking to you about today is something for which we see the signals already. We're just kind of taking those signals through a logical progression of how the technology will develop. But also on the plus side, and you will know this, all of you, particularly those of you working in the Safer Internet Centres and engaging in, you know, at the development of chatbots for young people, we also, of course, have huge opportunities for the better provision of live, non-human support to children and young people who need help, and particularly out of hours, right? So as humans, we cannot be awake 24/7, however much we try and be there for young people all the time. Having a bot, having somebody who can just pop up and answer questions even, just be there as a reassuring presence, can be really helpful. As I mentioned, we may see children who do not exist outside of data. And I'm going to talk very briefly about robot children, right? This may sound like a preposterous question about whether children who don't exist outside of data, whether they have rights, okay? Because everything that we do to protect children and young people is based on trying to protect them from physical and emotional harm, and that presumes that they can be physically injured and that they can feel distressed by something. So it's instinctive, isn't it, to think, well, robot kids, kids in data don't have any rights, but these are precisely the kinds of things that ethicists and technical specialists are debating at the moment. Now, the one thing I'd like you to focus on is the fact that, as we know, for machines to learn, they generally require large sets of data, to learn accurately. Otherwise, their learning will be skewed or misrepresentative. So, bearing in mind some of what Simone was talking about in terms of data capture, but also what Veronica was talking about earlier in terms of the amount of profiling that already goes on, do we accept that we may need to collect even more personal data from children in order to keep them safe? Is the fact that we're trying to keep them safe, does that give us an excuse or a good reason to collect more data from them? Because obviously the more we can profile them, the more we can profile the risky behaviors that they might be engaged in, the quicker we can identify when they might need help, and we might be able to intervene and prevent them from getting into a difficult situation. But should we do that? And what might the limits be? And who would be the people to set those limits? And I would particularly love to hear from the folks on the youth panel about that, because we've heard, particularly from us, about child participation and youth participation. I would love to hear what young people think about this. And Sabrina, you're back.
Yes, you said the keyword, and we actually have a hand raised from our big youth panelist, Liana from Luxembourg. If we could bring in Liana to ask her question directly to you. I think there were lots of comments from other youth panelists as well. A bit of concern also, as you mentioned, do you really think AI will be used in our homes? You have mentioned the smart cities before, AI in electronics, in TV. Some of our big youth panelists is asking, is there a plan to educate the ordinary people about AI and machine learning? Very tough question.
Fantastic questions. So Liana, are you ready to ask your question?
Yeah. Should I ask it now?
Yes, please do. Go ahead.
Okay. I actually have both a question and an answer to your question, but I'll ask the question first. What do you personally think about AI taking over, AI and technology taking over everyday life and everyday usage?
Oh, gosh, that's a question that you and I could probably spend the next 5 to 10 years researching. It's a fantastic question, and you'll be relieved to hear that there are lots of fabulous PhD students all over the world, looking at the extent to which it will assist in the first place, but also take over some of the functions that we generally perform. So one of the ways in which we can already see this is about using machines to crunch big data, right? And I can speak from experience here. When I started as an analyst in law enforcement, I had to manually review every report that we received in from members of the public, and I had to read and mark up and highlight all of the things that were of interest. And I used to have to fill in network charts manually, right? So now, 15 years on, we have tools, we have pieces of software that can extract all of that data, make the links, code it up for us, and tell us what the significance is. So in that way, that saved me a lot of time. But the downside of that is that I sometimes miss what the machine has not fed to me, right? That I sometimes miss those human aspects of what I would call the sixth sense. We have an instinct, don't we, about the things that don't feel quite right. We have a suspicion, almost as if sometimes things don't smell quite right. And at the moment, AI is not great at the human things that don't feel quite right. And that's where, personally, I think we still need to be able to apply our critical thinking when we're online, to look at the things that might be scams and don't look quite right, for instance, or look at situations where we think someone might be trying to manipulate us. So for the moment, we're still necessary. Our brains are still necessary, but it's certainly, I would say, the intention that that tools will be assisting our everyday lives a lot more. And if you think about it, we're already there, aren't we? Because we have, you know, voice activated Siri, we have personal assistants on our phones and on our devices. We have Google. I mean, Google is the best artificial assistant in terms of search engines. So we're already at that point where we're artificially enabled and enhanced. So I think we're going to see more of that. Yes, certainly in homes. And then Sabrina, to the question that you mentioned, is there a plan to educate? Well, one of the big concerns about AI is whether it will be explainable, firstly, to the people who are using it. So, you know, whether companies are using it or companies are buying it and then using it. Whoever's using it needs to be able to explain it to their colleagues, but it also needs to be explainable and explained to the public at large, and that's adults and young people. It's a challenge to explain AI, but it absolutely needs to be done. It raises a further question, which is who should do that? Is it on the education system? Is it on data protection authorities? Is it on the companies using it? Well, I think that's a question that we can all ponder as we go forward. Liana, I'm conscious that I cut off your comment there. Was there something else that you wanted to say?
Not really. I just had the answer to your question.
Oh, well, please. Answers are great, especially if I don't have them.
Okay. So you asked us about if we should like collect more personal data from children. My answer is that I believe is the worst thing to do, as if we, oh my god, as the data can fall into the wrong hands, first of all, and also having so much data on so many children is not particularly the greatest of ideas. Like I mentioned before, it can fall into the wrong hands, it can be used and abused, and also it will remove the trust between parents and children. So I believe that we need to teach the parents and the children to come to each other and express each other's problems, because you mentioned that it can prevent behaviors and things like that. But if there's no connection between the parents in the first place, then there's not really a point, as a child will refuse the help.
Liana, I think those are all really, really important considerations. And if you like, we can have a bit more of a conversation about this afterwards, because I think you've got some really, really good ideas and some really important views here. You're absolutely right. Privacy is a really, really important consideration here. And I think it's very important to consider the extent to which really conducting surveillance on children's activities, just because we can do it doesn't mean we should. And particularly if children feel like they're being spied on, you know, and we already have some of that at the moment. I think, you know, there is some of the safety technologies and parental control. You know, they're a great idea, but in practice, I think you're absolutely right. They can't replace a transparent conversation and having, you know, honest discussion about what children and young people are experiencing online. So, yeah, thank you very much for that. That's absolutely fantastic. That's exactly my point, I think, but perhaps didn't express it as well as you did. That we can do all of this profiling, but children have rights to, you know, private time as well, right? Now, I'm conscious that we have 2 more technologies to get through and we're going to run out of time. So I'm going to be really, really quick for this bit. So apologies, Sabrina, please stop me at the relevant point. And thank you, Liana, for that. Okay, so I mentioned robot children. And this is Able, and he was developed by the University of Pisa, and he's still in testing, of course. And he's been developed to be a representative of a 12-year-old child who provides companionship to older people with Alzheimer's to help them connect and be engaged in the world around them. He's a companion bot, a cobot. And of course, one of the questions is, you know, would we look at Able as if he were a real boy? Because what you can't see in this static image, but if you have a look at this Euronews story, it's a video. What you can see is him expressing emotion in sympathy with the person. So he can make a sad face, he can make a happy face. And, you know, given what we know about how bots are developing and about AI and about how that's becoming more human, although not quite a sentient human being just yet, how do we feel about these children? How will we react to them? Will we treat them, if we had one in our homes, would we respond to them and interact with them as if they were a real child? And if not, would we treat them as if they weren't human? Would we treat them as if they were just machines? Now, this is something that's been very popular in science fiction for many, many years, you know, robots and the point at which people start treating them as humans, or whether they're always treated differently. But what if somebody were to injure one of these and we were to see that robot expressing physical pain? How would we feel about that? They wouldn't have any rights in the law, but they would inevitably make us feel, I would have thought, quite uncomfortable to see a child being hit, for instance. It's something we need to think about, because these products are already, these machines are already in development. So I'm not going to dwell on that too much. I'm going to let you have a think about that, and we're going to move on to the next technology. I mentioned persuasive computing, and as I said at the start of the session, really the way we sum that up is it's the use of technology, digital technology, to change your perceptions or change your behavior. Now, we know that there are negative aspects to that already, don't we? Because we know the impact of disinformation, misinformation, whether it's deliberate or, you know, whether it's influence operations. But we also know about manipulation in a more positive sense. We know about the role of influencers. And I saw with interest earlier that there's been some really great work done by Simone and by Valerie on the role of child influencers, you know, young people who, you know, as young as 8 or 9, who are seeking to influence the people around them. So when it comes to the next generation of persuasive computing, that gets me thinking about how we develop internet safety education programs. Because what we all want to do to some extent is prevent those adverse experiences, those unwanted experiences that children and young people can have, whatever flavour they might be. And in the next few years, our ability to affect that perception change, to change how young people feel about their online interactions, and maybe even to change their behaviour, is going to increase, not least because we'll have artificial intelligence as well, learning much more about risk situations and how we can prevent them. But we also have an opportunity to intervene and change the perceptions and change the behaviour of those people who may pose a risk to children and young people. Both of those are likely to have more opportunities. So again, we have a question. If those education and intervention tools do become more persuasive, better at changing our perceptions, better at changing our behaviour, Will we need new transparency and accountability measures? So we were talking about educating people on AI. Who will make sure and how will we make sure that people using internet and people using digital technologies understand that this is being done, understand that there are, intervention tools and education tools in place that are looking to change their perceptions and their behavior. As I say, when bad actors do this, we call it social engineering or influence operations. And we want to know when somebody is manipulating us. So I think it raises some interesting questions for the future as these tools get more and more sophisticated. To what extent are we going to have to be very, very transparent about how these changes are affected? Okay, well, I'm going to jump forward, but again, please stop me. I promise to speak to you about immersive environments, about extended reality. And there are people attending this forum, particularly from Facebook and other platforms, who are in a much better position to explain to you all of the technology that's being developed. But you will have heard this word called the metaverse quite a lot in the last few weeks. Actually, it's a word, again, that's been around for a very, very long time. But what it really means is a world that you can inhabit in space. And actually, I'll take it back very, very shortly. You'll be used to seeing the big clunky headsets, but really, we're moving much more towards this. We're moving much more towards the capturing of data and the perception of the world around you through lenses, and whether they're sunglasses or whether they're glasses like this. What we're thinking of much more is that your online experiences, your experiences that you've normally ever only had at arm's length, the distance away of a screen or, at the end of your hand, will be right in front of your eyes, whether it's in augmented reality that's overlaid on your normal vision, or whether you are in virtual reality and it's all around you. Now, we've got some important considerations for this. And the first one, and there's actually, although it's a very new technology, there's actually quite a body of research on this going back all the way to, certainly over 10 years, particularly the work of Mel Slater and Ralph Schroeder, that what we experience in an immersive environment, an environment in which we actually feel we are physically present because it's all around us and it's encasing us, we feel that there is increased emotional impact. And they call it presence, being there, and co-presence, being there together with other people. When you feel like you're really there, you have increased emotional impact of both positive and negative experiences. So if you have a good time, you have a really good time and it feels really much more immediate. And if you have a bad time, it will feel like you're really having a bad time in physical space. And then when you think that what's already in development and already being used in some sectors is physical sensation. So those of you who are gamers will know that when you've got handheld controllers, you get vibrations sometimes, don't you? That's haptic feedback. It's a feeling of something happening. And there's a lot of work going on to build that into extended reality. So that, of course, opens up the opportunity for harmful experiences that are delivered in your line of sight, aren't just about text or photos or videos. They will be things that happen around you rather than information. And on the positive side, we may have massively enabling immersive environments, that build people's confidence, that make them feel more physically able in a way that they might not be offline. And strangely enough, this could present another challenge, which is that if you feel more confident, more able, more powerful in an online environment that is in space, that looks like you're actually there and feels like you're actually there, you might not want to leave it. And again, those of you who spend a lot of time on social media, or those of you who are gamers and you get really into it, you may already start to feel a bit like that you don't want to leave. Now, equally, you will have experienced extended reality quite a lot, I'm sure, in education. And one of the other ways that it's being used is to generate empathy for others. So to make you experience what other people might experience. So, for example, we've seen quite a bit of that use in relation to the experience of refugees and victims of human trafficking and things like that. So it's potential to be used to make people, for instance, who are engaged in bullying, make them understand how it feels to be bullied, right? So there's lots of positive use cases as well. But for both the positive and the challenges, the main thing to bear in mind is it's not going to be just like, you know, having your phone and being able to put your phone down and walk away from it. When you're there, you won't necessarily be able to get away from what you're seeing. It also raises some questions about our critical thinking again, right? Because if we receive a piece of information, if we see a news story, it will be delivered right in front of us, okay? Not something that we can put down, walk away from and have a think about and say, hey, that doesn't necessarily sound quite right. I wonder if I should go and check it out. It will be delivered in line of sight. So there we go. That's one vision of the metaverse, according to one gaming company. And I think it is that feeling of it being in space with depth and it being all around you. And one of the things that you will see whenever anybody puts on a VR headset, the very first thing that they will do is, without exception, actually, is this. They will turn around because they realize that they can see things all around them, not just in front of them.
Vic, we do have a question in the chat from one of our youth panelists, George, and he's saying the Google Class was ahead of its time, but are we at a point where AI is actually possible to implement in a way that could be mass-produced and have an actual good experience?
Right, that's such a good question. You're absolutely right. Google Glass was ahead of its time and it didn't really take off with mainstream consumers. But what not many people know is that it's still used quite extensively in industrial environments and in manufacturing and operational technology. So in some working environments, it's still used quite a lot in, you know, specific use cases. Yes, it's really, really important to make sure that that any kind of extended reality hardware is affordable, because otherwise people won't buy it, right? And the fact that in particular we're going to get faster and more reliable internet speeds with 5G is really, really important for extended reality as well. Because as I'm sure you will know, George, if you've used these before, some of the headsets have been a bit slow and a bit clunky and can make you feel a bit sick. So reducing that latency, reducing the lag is going to be something that 5G can really enable, and combined with reducing the cost of the hardware, that's where it will really take off. The big question is which year exactly? We're not 100% sure. So the considerations for extended reality, as I've mentioned, because we feel like we're actually there and we can't get away from what's in our line of sight, we are used to being able to trust our own eyes, aren't we? So what are the implications for our critical thinking of seeing something in front of us? We have a phrase, seeing is believing. What if we actually see it? What if rather than a piece of misinformation, we get a person come up to us in what feels like physical space, trying to convince us that something is true that might not be true, and they sound and they look real, right? They might even be able to touch us and we might be able to feel their, their handshake or something. So how are we going to make sure that the next generation of children and young people and the generation after that are also able to use their critical thinking to judge what doesn't feel quite right? And if we think about when you have a bad experience online, you want to be able to report something, don't you? And if you think about how social media works now, you might send a screenshot, or you might report or send a link to something that has upset you. But if it's an experience, how do you capture that evidence? How do you capture things going on around you? Well, thinking about those Ray-Bans that I showed the picture of earlier, you can capture data that may include other people in things like that. And does that mean that in order to capture your bad experiences, you have to be constantly recording in extended reality? Might that compromise the privacy of other people, just so that you can prove that something bad has happened to you? These are questions we need to ask, but we don't have answers for yet. And are there some use cases that should be prohibited? We already see, and you can find them yourselves, and I'm happy to supply the links later. On YouTube, it's become a bit of a thing to upload funny videos where adults, normally parents or caregivers, put children in VR and scare them by, putting them in a really scary VR game experience. I don't think that's very responsible. I think parents need to be discouraged from doing that, particularly, if there's a film classification or a game classification that's not age appropriate. So do we think there needs to be some cases that should be prohibited, like exposing a real child to a traumatic experience, or an experience in which it's possible to behave inappropriately towards a child that might not exist in the real world? But is it okay to go up and injure that child, or to touch them inappropriately, or verbally abuse them? It raises some really interesting questions about the kind of behavior that we want to encourage, because if it's okay to do that to an artificially generated child, it might give a signal that you can do that to real children as well, whether it's online or offline. And then finally, and very, very briefly, one of the things that I have an eye on, but I don't think will be with us by 2030, are brain-computer interfaces, brain-machine interfaces. And this is a mock-up of how Elon Musk's Neuralink will work. And just going behind the ear there. And the medical use cases already exist, right? That said, mainstream use of the two-way interfaces that both capture data from the brain and transmit data to it is probably more than 10 years away. Technology always moves quicker than we expect, but it's probably 10 years away. So we may have the possibility in the not too distant future to potentially literally change someone's thinking. And actually, it was in the news this week that brain implants could well be used for those people who have really, really severe depression. That there've been tests, and it can actually make someone feel better who's got really, really bad depression. And that sounds like a really good use case, right? If people volunteer for it, but you are effectively literally changing someone's thinking. And whether for positive or negative impact, this will be the most intrusive way yet of using computing, using machines to persuade people of something. And when we think about things like misinformation and fake news, we probably don't want to have a scenario where people are trying to manipulate how you think actually in your brain. That's going to be a difficult one to challenge. So I mentioned that I do futures projects, and I am very, very happy to say that we published the white paper for Project 2030, in which we build this world in which artificial intelligence actually interacts with robots, directs robots, that populate immersive environments. So all of these technologies converge with lots of other technologies, I should say, Internet of Things and the like. And all of this is already familiar to us to a certain extent, and the technology is already in development. The only thing we don't know is when exactly these technologies are going to come online. And one final thought that I would like you to bear in mind is that even though these scenarios were focused on cyber security, and even though it was a project designed mainly for adults, we did want to make sure that we had a young person as a character in this world that we built. And it's a 14-year-old boy called Kojo, who we saw at the forefront of development, particularly for things like gaming, and desperately bugging his mum to see if he could have a brain implant to make his gaming faster. So what I would like particularly from the young members of this session, the youth panel members, I would love for you to go and read these scenarios. They're at 2030.trendmicro.com. And I would love for you to tell me what you think. And I would love to continue the conversation with you. If you think they're rubbish, that's okay. You should still tell me, because I need to learn from that. But if you'd like to keep continuing the conversation about how life would be in 2030, please do email me at vbaines@bournemouth.ac.uk, or you can find me on Twitter @cyberbaines. Thank you very much indeed, all of you, for your time, your fantastic comments, and your super questions.
Thank you so much, Vic. I'm sure you will get a lot of emails. We have a lot of eager young people on the call, and they have been asking questions, and they're coming in. So there's definitely a lot of food for thought you have been giving us. If I can just, we still have some time to pick up on some of the questions. For example, we have one again from one of our youth panelists, from Molly from Ireland. She say, my question is, do you think that robots could be used for people that find it hard to express feelings in a school or another environment, for example?
Wow, Molly, that's a great question. And I wanted to say I loved your panel talk earlier today. So well done with that. Yes, I think this could be really, really promising use case in education, but also socially as well, right? So I think it's not too much of a leap from the current use case that the University of Pisa has, which is, you know, making people with dementia and with Alzheimer's just feel a bit more comfortable and feel a bit more independent. Having somebody to relate to is so important when you're young, isn't it? I'll let you into a bit of a secret with, you know, hundreds of people on this call. When I was young, I had friends, but I was most close to my dogs. They were the people that I spent most of my time with and I really related to. And we have, don't we? We have therapy dogs and we have assistance dogs in schools to make people feel more comfortable. So I think it's not impossible that your idea could well be taken up of having companion robots that are humanoids, you know, perhaps companion friends the same age or a bit older, an older brother or sister figure. I could absolutely see that taking off in schools.
Thank you so much, Vic, for answering this question. We also got a comment earlier from Heidi. She's working for one of the helplines, and she was actually saying that they are considering AI for counseling to make the whole online counseling experience, of course, more real. That is, of course, a good opportunity. What do you think about this approach? Any thoughts?
I think it's a great approach. I think it's a great approach from the perspective of, you know, what I mentioned about the operational considerations. You know, I know the work of the hotlines through my, you know, role on the advisory board at InHope. And yeah, Heidi, thank you so much for your question. It's lovely to feel that I can see you, even if I can't. But you know, we know that there is call to reach out to the hotlines and helplines at 3 o'clock in the morning when you might not be available, you know. So just being able to be there for somebody, particularly a child or a young person, when they need you, is a really, really important driver, I know. I also think that support is going to get more comprehensive as the tools get smarter. And I think we're going to see chatbots in particular and these virtual assistants being used a lot more in education as well. We heard earlier about personalized education, and thinking also about, you know, the question that Molly just asked. You know, there's nothing to stop us having virtual assistants, all of us having our own personal virtual assistant for internet safety. So it wouldn't necessarily be about reaching out in times of crisis when there was an urgent situation. It could be about having somebody, you know, that you can ask whenever you want, rather than, you know, reaching out to you in the hotlines and the helplines every time something's become an emergency.
Thank you so much for answering this question. There's a lot of interaction in the chat. We got another question from Mikko. He's from Faktabari in Finland, and he's asking, do you believe there can be a backlash to the trend enabling more and more digital manipulation? Would we need a counter trend for something we could trust and it's real? Any thoughts on this?
Oh, gosh. I've got lots of thoughts, Mikko, but I don't know how we take that outside of a 5 minute, how we do that in a 5 minute conversation. I tell you what I do think is still really important. There's, as you know, and it's very topical at the moment politically, there is a greater focus on the tech companies dealing with misinformation and with manipulation and with fake news. And I think that's absolutely right. I think the tech companies do have a responsibility. My concern is, and I think that's possibly where your concern is lying as well, but I don't want to speak for you, is that the more that we have technical solutions to this problem, the less there is an onus on all of us to actually use our critical thinking. And critical thinking has to be still so important, recognizing all of the challenges that I've highlighted about how you would employ your own critical thinking in virtual reality. We still need to educate people to make up their own minds and to see the cues and to be properly informed about what is trustworthy information and experiences and what isn't trustworthy or is less trustworthy. So in all of this and in all of the debate around what is the right approach to countering manipulation, fake news, etc., I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that we still need everybody, whichever generation they are, and the future generations, to be properly informed and to be able to use their own critical thinking and judgment skills really effectively.
Thank you, Vic. I just remind colleagues on the call, please do raise your hand if you have any comments or questions. We can definitely bring you in to talk directly to Vic, so please just let us know. And one hand came up immediately from Angelo. You have heard from him in the chat already, Vic. He's also one of our youth panelists. So if we could bring Angelo, if we can unmute Angelo and bring him to the stage, that would be great.
Hello, can you hear me well?
Absolutely.
So I have one question for Victoria. Do you think after 2030 be more plans for future artificial intelligence?
Do I think there will be more plans for artificial intelligence after 2030?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, so I think so, yes. So I don't think that 2030 will be an end point for artificial intelligence. I think it will just keep developing, right? So that raises some really interesting questions about who regulates that. And you'll be relieved to hear that the Council of Europe and the European Commission and other international organizations are absolutely looking at how artificial intelligence might be regulated, what is the ethical way to use artificial intelligence, and all the different types of artificial intelligence that comprises. But I think one of the things we're least certain about is once machines and tools become more intelligent, what happens then? Now, it's easy, isn't it, to think about all of the science fiction movies like Terminator, you know, where the machines run rogue and they run all over the world and they take over, the robots take over. I hope we don't get to that point. I hope that we have regulations shaped by people like you, Angelo, perhaps, you know, thinking about some of the things that could go wrong and some of the opportunities, and actually, you know, thinking about the limits on what artificial intelligence should be able to do. But the trouble is, we don't know how smart it's going to get. And the more smart it gets, the smarter it will get. So I think, yeah, in answer to your question, it's anybody's guess beyond 2030 which way this is going to go. Another thing we need to think about, of course, is quantum computing. And I didn't mention quantum computing because I think it's outside of our 2030 scope. But increasingly, companies like Google and IBM are making use of quantum computers. Now, quantum computers are hugely powerful because, to cut a long story short, they compute in a different way, even to our current supercomputers. And I suspect, Angelo, you know just as much about this as I do. I suspect you're quite interested in this, but we'll see.
A lot.
The trouble is, because we don't know when quantum computing will become mainstream, we don't know when, you know, at the point that it does become mainstream, suddenly lots of computation, lots of calculations that we haven't been able to do before will become possible. So making sense of really, really big data will be a lot easier for a quantum computer. If you're interested in cybersecurity, it does also have some security implications, because the current encryption that we use could be cracked by a quantum computer. And so folks that work in cybersecurity are now quite exercised with this idea that we need to create quantum safe, cryptography and quantum safe encryption, so that we can protect all of our communications, even if quantum computers crack the existing encryption that we have today in 2021.
Thank you so much, also, Angelo, for your question. I think, Vic, it's really reassuring that the young people are thinking ahead of 2030 already. So that's really ensuring. We have two more hands raised, and I would like to first bring in Chris Pinchin. I hope you can hear us.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi.
Hi, Vic. All of these technologies you've mentioned here are very, very high tech. Okay, I'll give you a quick example of what I want to talk about. People I play music, and one thing that's very interesting about what's happened in music is young people who are learning to sing now, listen to pop music, have never listened to pop music that has not been subjected to auto-tune and quantizing. You know, so the rhythms are all absolutely correct, voices are manipulated always. And that's having a significant effect on how young people learn to sing, because they try to sing like that. Are there other technologies that are already existing, or you foresee existing, that are kind of smaller, not quantum computing, these kind of things, but have this kind of behavioral change due to the technology itself and the spread of that technology?
Chris, that is a great example, and it's one that I'm acutely aware of because I'm a singer myself, and I learned to sing, of course, pre-auto-tuning and pre-quantizing, and it is something that I'm quite concerned about, actually. You know, in the same way that, and perhaps this answers your question, but in the same way that perhaps there's an expectation that you will be tune perfect, and you will be timing perfect when you sing. Equally, I suppose that there's a parallel in filtering, isn't there, with images? I have photos of myself from my teenage years where I don't look my best, but they are hard copy photos that only I have access to, and I show them to my family and my friends when I want to give them a laugh. I don't expect every photo that I have to be shared online, and I haven't had to spend a lot of time perfecting that appearance, as I'm sure will be obvious to some of you. So, you know, perhaps it is about that perfection. And I'm not the best person to speak to about, you know, to speak about body image and some of those issues. But I would be interested to hear what some of the youth panel on this call think about that, if they have any additional comments, because that would be the immediate one that I would think of, would be about image retouching, which used to be the preserve of graphic artists and graphic designers, didn't it? And photographers, and now is available to everybody. But perhaps the other one is search engines. You know, we forget, or it's easy to forget, even for somebody like me that, you know, used to have to use the Encyclopedia Britannica to look things up about, you know, topics I wasn't particularly knowledgeable about, or to go and sit in libraries. It is easy to forget that, you know, Wikipedia hasn't always existed. It's not always been possible just to look up the world's information. I wouldn't say that was a small change necessarily, but it is one that we perhaps forget about because we've grown used to it.
Great. Oh, very, very interesting. But for me, it's interesting that kind of less spectacular change, which has affected kind of under the radar, but becomes absolutely pervasive in its.
It's funny you should mention that, Chris, because one of the things we cover in those scenarios that I mentioned, Project 2030, is we look at education. And I'll be honest with you, I think to a certain extent we're already there, that education becomes more about teaching research skills rather than knowledge retention. So it's about, you know, are you able to go and find the answer to a question on your own, rather than, you know, my education in classics, where I learned, you know, Latin verbs and nouns and adjectives, and I learned them by rote. You know, particularly as we're increasingly having simultaneous language translation as well for modern languages, is this something that needs to happen in the future to the same degree? Could it be more about educating people to find out the answers?
Right, thanks.
Thank you so much, Chris, for this question. We have another hand raised from Liana, one of our big youth panelists, and I think it's really great to see that all the questions are coming in from them. They certainly put us to work, Vic. So Liana, please ask your question.
My question is there something you fear about these technology advancements?
Is there something I fear about them? Is that correct? So I just want to make sure I've got the right question. Yeah. Right, thank you. Well, because I used to be a cybercrime investigator, and because it was my job to always look at the dark side of the internet, it is my natural instinct to look at the worst of what people can do to each other. But I do think it's important to remember that it is the worst of what people can do to each other. And that by and large, most people are quite nice to each other on the internet. It was a big revelation to me when I worked in the police, and then I went to work for Facebook. Excuse me, because I've been talking so much, I've got a bit of a tickle in my throat. Hang on a second. To see that actually what most people do on the internet is they share pictures of their children and their dogs and their dinner and their holidays. That, you know, most people aren't cyber criminals, most people aren't child abusers, and that's actually hugely reassuring. But because it's in my nature and it's in my training, because I've been trained as a threat analyst, particularly to look at future threats, I can't help it. I can't help looking at some of these challenges. But what it's really, really important to do is to balance those with the opportunities. So all of the tools that I have described to you, all of the technologies that we've talked about today, can be misused, because there are two things we know, right? Technology will always develop. It always has, ever since, well, actually before the Stone Age. We get new tools, and that allows us to make new tools, etc. So technology will keep on developing. And unfortunately, there is a bit of a constant, which is that some people will always want to do bad things to other people. That's the reality, right? We can prevent a lot of bad behavior. We can prevent young people becoming victims to bad behavior. But there's still that urge for some people to want to harm other people. So knowing that, we can look at the technology and say, right, all of this technology is open to misuse, and it may happen that they are misused, but at the same time, it presents brilliant opportunities. What I sometimes worry about is that you'll hear some people say that certain technologies shouldn't exist because they're not 100% safe. And I think you've already heard today, you know, we can't completely eliminate safety risks for children and young people online. We can all do our very, very best to minimize them, and we should be seen to be, you know, we should be held to account by young people like you, but also by adults who work in this space in child protection. We should all have to show that we are doing our very, very best. But at the same time, it's really, really important to ensure that everybody understands we have to accept a certain amount of risk online, all of us, adults and children, simply because we're interacting with other people, and people will do bad things sometimes. So the technology, to some extent, is the conduit. It's the means by which people can behave well towards each other or behave inappropriately towards each other. So yes, I do have fears, but I'm also hugely optimistic about some of this technology, and particularly, I have to say, with the way that the youth panel, yourself and other members of the youth panel have engaged on this session and have asked all your questions and made all your comments, that's hugely encouraging to me, because it makes me think that, you know, I'm not just going to be the only person thinking about this stuff, and it won't just be adults who are afraid that are going to be thinking about this stuff. You will all have an opportunity to shape how this technology looks and how you use it in the future. So as you well know, you don't have to be passive consumers of this technology. You can demand to be part of how it develops.
Thank you so much, Victoria, and also for these very encouraging words. We're coming to the end almost of our session, but there's still very great conversation going on in the chat. So if you don't mind, I would just ask one more question to you from the audience, from Veronica. She is saying technology evolves faster and faster, and sadly, educational systems and regulators all over the world are unable to catch up. Do you think it's time for educational systems and regulators to also become more innovative? Are we investing too little in innovation in areas such as these mentioned?
Gosh, I think the short answer to that is yes. We are investing too little in both of those areas, but I think it comes with its own challenges if we invest more. So education, I would always say, always invest more in education, but then it raises the question of skills, doesn't it? You know, having debates like this is actually the first part of education, to my mind. I would love there to be technology lessons in schools where it's not just about coding. It's not just about, you know, the things that we absolutely rightly and correctly worry about, like getting more girls into science and technology subjects. That is really important. But I would love for technology classes to have ethical debates, have debates about regulation, have debates not just about the coding and the safety, but the wider uses of technology. And that, of course, requires that teachers and educators are themselves interested and motivated. So, Veronica, if you can think of a way that we can kind of inject a little bit more oomph into that debate, I'd be really happy to speak to you about that. On the legal side, I think it's a bit difficult with regulation because one of the things we've always done as a society is we've regulated against bad things when we've seen them. I used to talk about, trying to future-proof regulation, but in a way that's actually quite unethical and immoral, right? So laws come about, and particularly things are criminalized, people, things are turned into criminal offences because we see them in society and we decide as a community that they're unacceptable and that they shouldn't happen. And so we develop punishments for that, and we develop deterrence for that to try and, prevent people by telling them that they will go to prison, for instance. So what's really challenging is trying to regulate for something that hasn't happened yet, because that implies that we're going to restrict people's freedoms potentially in a way that might not actually be real or might not materialize. And that's one of the challenges, of course, about doing futures work like this. Particularly when I work with businesses on cybersecurity, I say to them, oh, you're going to need to think about the risks attached to AI, and you're going to need to think about the security risks attached to extended reality. And they quite rightly say to me, that's great, but if you can't tell me exactly when that is going to happen, I can't buy anything, I can't develop anything to stop bad things happening. And I think to a certain extent, it's similar with regulation. I would love regulators and policymakers to be thinking about these issues now so that we're not 5 years or 10 years behind when we need to regulate, but equally now is clearly too soon, isn't it? So I think it's maybe education and regulation go together in the sense that we need to educate the regulators and the legislators to be able to anticipate and be prepared for some of these changes when they actually happen.
Victoria, thank you so much for trying to answer all these very, very difficult questions and for sharing your thoughts with us. This has been a very, very great session. Thank you so much for everyone to contribute. We are at the end of our time, but Vic has shared her email address and also her Twitter handle. So I'm sure, Vic, as I said, you will probably receive a lot of further questions and comments. Thank you so much for being with us. It was such a great session. Thank you, everyone. This is also the final session of the first day of the Safer Internet Forum, and we will continue tomorrow morning. So we do hope to see you all tomorrow morning. We will kick off the day with 2 deep dive sessions that will almost run in parallel. So you may have to choose. And there will be 1 deep dive session starting at 9:30 Central European Time on child sexual abuse material. This deep dive session is hosted by our colleagues from InHope. And then at 9:45 Central European Time, there will be another deep dive session on online gaming, where we will hear from colleagues from the Finnish Safer Internet Center, and also colleagues from Roblox will be there. So great lineup again. Please do keep an eye on your inboxes so you have the right links to join us tomorrow morning. It was a fantastic day. Thank you to everyone, especially thank you to Victoria for finishing the day with so much food for thought. I wish everyone a very good evening, and we do hope to see you tomorrow morning in either of these 2 deep dive sessions. Thank you so much, and see you tomorrow, everyone.